Hello. Hey everybody. Hi everyone. Welcome back to the Emo Social Club podcast, middle of the day edition. I am Brian.
I'm Lizzie.
And the reason that we're recording this really early compared to our other streams on a Tuesday at 3 p.m. Chicago time, because of the fact that we have a guest today who is in the middle of the night in the UK. Lee, why don't you say hi?
Hi, everyone.
Lee, first, so you're in Northern Ireland, and can you explain what Northern Ireland is to everyone?
So I'm from Belfast, Northern Ireland, which is a part of the United Kingdom. It's the north of the island of Ireland, but it is part of the UK. So it's UK laws, UK lockdown procedure, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, that's a contentious subject. That's a whole other podcast, I think.
Yeah, I don't necessarily want to get into the history of the UK and Northern Ireland, but
I feel like we would definitely need charts and graphs and
definitely
a PowerPoint of presentation.
Yeah, a whole.
I'm grossly underprepared for that. I'm really sorry.
That is totally fine. I don't want to get into it, but I've already had a discussion this week with somebody very close to me who lives in my apartment and is dating me about where the location of Northern Ireland is and why it is part of the UK and why it isn't part of Ireland. And I'm like, I don't know. I don't know how to help you.
I don't know how to help you.
I don't know how to help. I'm like, it just is. I don't know.
I think the easiest way to summarize it for me is that if somebody from the United States asks me where I'm from, I say Ireland, because explaining that is a real conversation killer, especially if you've just met the person. So there you go.
But
there's a lot of politics involved with it, everyone.
Yeah.
Wouldn't you? So if somebody's like, oh my God, I love Dublin, wouldn't you be like, but I'm not from Dublin?
I smile and nod politely. That's the thing. And it's, the people I've been friends with for, nearly 10 years that still assume that I'm flying home to Dublin, if I'm flying back from a tour or whatever. And I'm like, yeah, no, Belfast this time, where I actually live,
where my home is.
different part of the country entirely, different part of the island entirely. But we'll gloss over that. It's fine.
Yeah. Well, okay, that's our geography lesson for this specific podcast. So we have you on because you are a friend of the pod, a friend of friends of the pod. And also, I met you because you were doing sound. You're a sound engineer for the band Pale Waves.
Correct.
Who I haven't probably not stopped talking about since I found out about Pale Waves. As I posted on Facebook, I'm like, it's pretty much one of the only bands that started after 2009 that I actually listened to, because my musical tastes are always way back from the early 2000s.
I get that. I'm definitely like, a certain amount of years behind what's kind of going on right now. So I'm okay with that though. I'll find things at my own pace. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. So why don't you give us a little bit of an introduction into like what it means to be a sound engineer, sort of your history, because I know you've obviously worked with a lot more bands than just Pale Waves. So. Maybe give us a little bit of an introduction to yourself as far as your work history. This is an interview, by the way.
Cool. Well,
interview,
all right. So what are your dreams and aspirations in this job?
Where's your 5-year goal?
God.
Oh God. I mean, I have been thinking about that, in all honesty. We can talk about that later, but yeah, cool. So I'm Lee. I'm from Belfast. I spend most of my time touring now, as a live sound engineer, as a front of house engineer for the audience, or a monitor engineer for the band. It depends on the artist or who I'm working for. I've also toured quite extensively as a technician, just a general audio technician, supporting other engineers on bigger tours. And it's a very team effort kind of thing. And I've done some system teching, which is more sort of specific to the sound system itself, whether that's for concert touring or festivals. So the kind of idea with working in this industry is that you kind of, it pays to have a good grasp of kind of everything, so that you can lend your hand to any of those kind of skills sets if and when required. But in terms of like touring, like where I'm happiest and most comfortable is mixing. But it didn't start out that way. I'm a drummer. I started playing drums when I was 11 years old, and all I wanted to do whenever I was that age was just be a drummer. Like I was the 5 foot whatever with shoulder length blonde hair, the world's biggest Travis Barker fan. I could barely see over my drum kit. Like my cymbals were like 9 feet tall and my drums were all flat. Like I'll try and find some photos. I was like, yeah, I bumbled through playing piano, and I was like, piano's not cool enough and whatever. And I was like, I want to play guitar. That's what I really want to do. And I convinced my parents. I was like, okay, I want to play guitar. And they're like, yeah, but you didn't really give piano a try, so we don't want to like give you another instrument. And I got a guitar, and I was bad, and I never got any better. I was like really bad, and that was really disappointing. I think that was one of the first things, in my life that I can remember where I was like, I've put so much effort into like trying to get good at this thing, and I'm just not good at it. And I was like really bummed out. I was like, oh, maybe music's not for me. And I'm not going to give you my life story through this, but it's kind of an interesting trajectory because with drums, where I kind of ended up, I literally went to a free trial drum lesson, and I could just play drums. Like it was just completely just natural, like sort of aptitude. The physicality of it for me was really, it made a lot of sense. And I did, and I was like, cool, right? I'm a drummer now. That's what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. And I was like, I'm going to be a session drummer. I'm going to go and study in London and, do all these things. And then I got signed. The band that I was in got signed to like a very small sort of production deal. And I think I was about 15, like I was pretty young. And that was my first sort of experience of working in the industry. In terms of like having to deal with like contracts and producers and all that kind of stuff. And my eyes were just like, wow, there's a whole other side of this that I never knew about. So, and that band kind of fizzled out. All the guys in the band that I was in the band with were all a good couple of years older than me. One of them was training to be a barrister. One of them went on to study engineering. One of them is now a mechanical engineer, and I was a kid still at school. So they were like, they did their own thing. And then the band kind of fell apart. So I was like, okay. And during this time, I was like, I'm really interested in like, whenever we were doing shows, I was really interested like what the sound engineer's job was. But I had no real sort of like, I couldn't put two and two together. I was like, well, I show up with my drums and some mics go on it, and I do a gig and I go home. And that was all it. That's all it was to me. But as I started recording more, I got really interested in how sounds were created, the process of making a record to like physically being sent MP3s or a CD. I actually found a load of CDs from my old band when I was clearing out my office a couple of days ago, and I don't even have anything to play a CD on now. Like that's kind of where we are now. Around that time, when everything went kind of south, I was still at school. I was studying my A levels, so I don't know what that is for you. I was like 16, 17. Like what were you in?
Like junior, senior in high school, like the last 2 years of high school.
Yeah. So I was a junior, and I started getting really into a couple of things. I still studied music the whole way through, even though I I can read music and I can read score, but I've never played like a melodic instrument to a high level. So I can read score, but I couldn't play it on anything. I got really interested in business. I got really interested in media in terms of video, art, sort of, and kind of, all in, and IT. And at the same time, I was like, well, maybe I could find something that's going to kind of put all of that together. And that's kind of where I ended up. So I was either going to go and study law, because that's where I was going, like the rest of my bandmates at the time, or I was going to go and study sound engineering. And I chose sound engineering, and I don't regret it at all. But I had at the time, so I finished school, I went to university, college, uni, and I was there for 3 years. I moved to Liverpool, and that was a big sort of change for me. Just, I grew up in a kind of a smallish seaside town, in the southeast coast of Northern Ireland. Where like the buses finished at 9:30. Like if you wanted to leave this, the town after 9:30, you had to like walk or, get a cab. So moving to a big city, I was like, ooh, oh, right. Okay. This is like proper independence and whatever. And I started like, going to more gigs, and, I was, working with artists, while I was at university. And for 2.5 years, I had zero aspirations to be a live sound engineer. I was absolutely terrified of the prospect of working a gig. Like really, like I was like, no, I don't want to do that. I want to like work in the studio, where if I screw up, I can just, put the talk back on and be like, sorry, the computer crashed. Can we do that again? You can't do that live. So
is that why they always told me that at my old band? Like, oh, sorry, it's the computer. It's like, no, I just
maybe they told you that because they were like, man, this kid sucks.
No, I think I was fine. I think they hated just the music we were making. They're like, oh, you guys are performing this really bad music very well.
Maybe, or maybe it was just genuinely a computer crash. Like, they do happen. Let's be honest here.
I'll have faith in it. It's I'm plenty of years separated from it, where I'm not worried that like, oh man, they still hate my band. It's like, I hated that band too. Whatever, who cares?
Amazing. But yeah, so like as I said, I had no real aspirations to be to work in like gigs, like live sound, and that was due to like the fear of the unknown and kind of being out of my comfort zone. And in the last like 8 months of my of studying at college, I was like, oh, actually, I don't think I'm going to be able to sustain a living doing the studio thing, because I made some friends that were graduates, and I was looking up to these people that had, that were like top of their game when they left, university, and they were only just kind of starting to like really get a good foothold in the industry. And like I'd heard stories of people like living in tents, in the middle of Soho in London, where all the post-production houses are, because they couldn't afford to live in London, so they lived in a tent. Like that that kind of stuff. Like these people were like dedicated to like getting into the industry. And at the time, I started working. Whenever I was on like a summer holiday, I would move back from Liverpool to Belfast, back to my parents. And I had a little studio at home, which is kind of where I learned and made all the mistakes that I did before I moved to study this for real. And I was bringing bands over from the UK, that I was working with, to like my summer, studio house, on the at the beach, in Ireland, and they were like, "Oh my God, this is amazing!" They were getting like.
This sounds like a TripAdvisor, like, come have a nice like experience by the seaside while we record your next album.
I mean, that's probably what I tried to tell them, but in reality, it was them sleeping on like blow up mattresses and like tracking guitars for 18 hours a day. The thing was for me is that I was getting time, like, because time is, valuable when it comes to like working in studios and live touring productions. You're trying to do as much as you can in the smallest amount of time possible to make it sort of economically viable. But so I was like, well, if you want to come and live with me for like 2 weeks, don't have to pay any money to like stay there. And if you can pay me like a small amount of money because you're going to come out of this with like an EP or an album, everyone wins. And then I was able to use that as my my sort of like submittable hand-in stuff for my course. So it was kind of win-win. And I got a call from a guy I knew in Belfast, a guy called Rocky O'Reilly, who has the best name in the world.
That is an awesome name.
That is.
He's a producer, singer-songwriter, mixer, engineer. Like he's one of the most brilliant people I know, and I consider him a really good friend. And he's kind of the reason in a lot of ways that I'm doing what I'm doing now. He was the catalyst for me moving back to Belfast, me starting to work with some of the bands that he was working with, that then took me out on the road as an engineer. And then while I was out on tour with those bands, I met the other bands, and then I worked with them, and then and it was just a snowball. And if I hadn't have said, yeah, cool, I'm going to move back and I'm going to work in your studio, I don't know what I'd be doing right now. In all honesty, like that's how, sort of critical it was. So I have a lot to thank him for. So yeah. And then, so I graduated in 2012 and it's now 2020. I worked in that studio as a manager, staff engineer, working with bands and mixing my own projects and stuff like that. And then I got the call to go out and mix a band called And So I Watch You From Afar, who are a instrumental like post-rock band from Northern Ireland, who at the time, before I was even into like recording and microphones, if you're going to like literally break it down to that level, I loved them as a band. And I was so I worked as an assistant on one of their records. I then engineered or co-engineered rather the following record with Rocky, and they were both successful records in a couple of regards. But on the second record, they were going to go out and tour, and they didn't have an engineer. So they were like, well, look, you are, young and impressionable. Do you want to come out and, mix us live? To which I was like, well, obviously, yes. I have no history as an engineer. And they were like, yeah, but you know what you're doing, and we know, like, the music, and that was really important to them, that that there was a good level of understanding of the musicality of the band, because a lot of it's very effect heavy, and it's instrumental. So realistically, like, sound engineering 101, if you're going to mix a band live, is, can you hear the vocal, yes or no? Like, if that's a really good place to start.
Yeah.
With them there was no vocals, so I was like, sweet, I can do whatever I want. Like, I can put like 9 seconds of reverb on the floor tom if I want to, or I can have like all this. It was brilliant. It was a playground for me. But it was great, and it put me through my paces in terms of, they toured really relentlessly of all shapes and sizes of venues across Europe. But then we also went to places like, we went to India to do some shows there, which was, for me, like, bar being like to France, and I went to Greece once as a kid. I'd never really been out of the country that much. So I was like, wow, I'm going to India to do shows. Like, this is crazy. And again, that's a whole other podcast as well, because there was like monsoons and people getting electrocuted, and like, it was crazy. But while I was out there, I met another band called Dry the River, and Dry the River really liked what I was doing with And So I Watch You. So they were like, hey, our front of house engineer is on his way out. Would you fancy covering him for a couple of shows while they were going out and supporting a band called Editors from the UK? I don't know if you've
heard of Editors, yeah.
Great, they're a really good band, actually. So I did those, and then like, that's it. It's like, it was just this kind of, I'm a front of house engineer now. I quit my job at the studio, which was really hard to do because it was like my dream job. I went from being, I want to be a drummer for the rest of my life. to I want to be a recording engineer for the rest of my life. And then I finally got there, and then I was like, I've done this for 2 years and I'm quitting, and I'm going to go and I'm going to go and live off my credit card for 6 months because I got no money.
Yeah.
But I don't regret it at all. I mean, yeah, so that's like, yeah, mid 2000s to kind of mid 2015 or whatever. So yeah, that's my 20 something minutes summary of like the last, 15 years or whatever.
Nice.
So yeah.
Yeah.
I'm interested in, oh, sorry.
No, you go ahead, Lizzie.
I'm interested to know why you wanted to study law originally, because that's quite a spectrum of difference of let me be an audio engineer or let me study law.
Yeah, I think it stemmed from I was really interested in how things were developing in the world with things like the formats of deliverables were changing. So you have things like, DVD and Blu-ray, you had the iPod, you had all this digital rights management kind of, there was massive shifts in the sort of the industry that I became kind of aware of, which realistically we all take for granted now. But I think in like the mid 2000s, I remember still burning CDs. I didn't own an iPod until I was like 19. Weirdly, as somebody that's not a Luddite, and I've owned every single iPhone, for example, since they came out, I never really understood the fascination with listening to music on the go. For me, it was like, I was still quite ritualistic about it. I kind of liked sitting in front of my computer and like chatting on MSN and listening to music. That was my thing. Anyway, so there was so much change in the industry, and also that brief foray that I had with my band, and like the first time I ever read a contract, I was like, oh right, okay, this is really interesting. So yeah, I was kind of like, oh, maybe I could go into like some sort of like media law, and I was really interested in business, but I had no real aspirations at the time to become an entrepreneur. So I was like, yeah, I'm gonna, so I did some like kind of taster kind of like short course things that my school was offering to kind of give people an idea of what studying certain degrees would be like. And the reality is that what I do for a living isn't taught until you are an adult, really, if that makes sense. Where I grew up, you had no music technology sort of junior senior year, we call them A levels, unless you went to like a vocational college in which that was the only thing that you studied. So I still wanted to study music. I still wanted to study IT because I'm an IT person. Like that's my thing. So I just decided to study a range of subjects so that would kind of give me some flexibility down the line. But yeah, law was kind of where I was going, and it seems crazy now because I wouldn't know where to start really. But and we'll kind of, I guess, touch on this a little bit later. But when you are touring for a living, you're in a lot of ways you're kind of your own business. So you've got to do. There's a lot to it beyond just mixing the show. That's the easy bit, and that only occupies 90 minutes of your day. It's the other 22 and a half hours that goes into that, plus everything else. So yeah, but yeah, and answer to your question, really, I don't know why law, but that's kind of where it went. So yeah,
I'm interested in that though, because I imagine that, like, I mean, obviously you are a behind the scenes person in music, so I could imagine like it's like I want to do all the stuff that's behind the scenes of actually being on the stage, rather than like worrying about like, oh, I don't know. As a drummer, I could imagine you're like, I really just don't want to carry my drums every day.
That was a factor. I mean, yeah. We used to have these like terrible, like our public transport system used to have these like terrible buses that, the door would blow open, if the bus drove over 40 miles an hour, and, they didn't have heaters. And, but the one good thing is that I could carry my hardware bag for my drums, and a snare drum and a cymbal bag over my back. And I would like literally like trips this stuff, like, in and on and off the bus like twice a week for band practice, and yeah, there was probably there was probably a time when I was like 15 or whatever, and I'm like, yeah, I don't want to do that anymore. Because in reality, like, I know session drummers in London that are like, hauling their own gear in and out of Ubers, from like studio session to gig. So, and I have a lot of respect for them for doing that.
Wow.
But yeah, no, you touched upon a good point there. All I wanted to be was like, oh, I'm the drummer. I wanted that sort of lifestyle of like playing live and being on a stage. And then at some point, I don't know whether I kind of like wanted to take like a sabbatical from it, or maybe I got a little bit like prematurely jaded. But I didn't. I was like, no, I don't. I actually want to be, somebody that makes these things happen, for other people. I do miss the idea of like being a drummer for a living, playing in a band, because that was what I wanted to do first and foremost, really. I still play. I'm a lapsed drummer. I haven't quit. I still own a kit. And I, if the drummer in a band that I'm working with has gone out for lunch, I might, just have a little, go on their drum kit, just and then they kind of run in.
Know won't kill him.
Yeah, it's actually funny. Kira from Pale Waves got a new kit on I think it was the last time I saw you. It was somewhere in the US. I can't remember, but did you come? Yeah, you didn't come to any of the 75 shows, right?
I came to the 1975 show in Chicago. Yeah.
Yeah, you're the United Center. Yeah. So the kit that that Kira had for that tour was like this brand new, really nice custom DW, and I think it was like on day 2. We set up and we had loads of time, and it was basically like a clear stage. So I was like, I'm gonna have to go in this drum kit, and it was great, and I had so much fun. And then Kira was like, I heard my drums, and I was like, who's playing my drums? She kind of came all the way down from the dressing room and was just stood there, just like, what are you doing? And I'm like, oh, just playing your drums. And she's like, oh, cool. That's cool.
Make sure it sounds fine. It's it's good.
Just a quick sound.
It starts with the source. The drums have to sound good. So yeah.
Change that from the vocalist. Who cares about the singer? The drummer.
Can you hear the kick? Can you hear the kick drum? Great, you got a gig. That's all. That's all you need. Kick drum and vocal.
Pretty much. Sometimes when my old band would play, we would be at a place where there was no we couldn't mic everything, and to a certain extent you didn't need to mic like the guitars or that, and we didn't have a bassist, which is even better. We would literally only sound check vocals and kick drum.
Oh my God.
And it's like, hey, as long as you got those mic'd and they sound good, like pretty much all right.
Yeah, I mean, with that band and So Watch You that I worked with, we did loads of. I mean, their backline was pretty hefty, and they were just a loud band. And when you have no vocals, because that is the thing, that the smaller the venue, it's really difficult. It's just basic physics. It's really difficult to get. You're trying to amplify the quietest acoustic signal, and generally that's a voice versus like a Marshall 4x12 cabinet. So it was a shock to my system when I started mixing a band with a vocalist, because I was like, I've been getting away with literally like scot-free, with no sort of like with no issues. And you get into a workflow and a mindset, and then it's like, I've got 5 vocalists. Oh no! Like I'm gonna have to work really backwards and kind of reteach myself like how to actually mix a band with vocals and whatever. But yeah, I've done those shows where it's like throw a 58 in the kick drum and that's it. With And So Watch You, and literally like the shows were great. Like they were like kind of more like house show kind of vibe anyway. It was just like really kind of edgy, on the edge, like things were going to fall over, and it was cool. It was great. You don't really get that. The sort of the bigger the show, you lose touch of that kind of like that feeling of like things falling over and exploding and catching fire. Like these are all things that I've kind of witnessed myself. So yeah, it's going from being a drummer to wanting to be a lawyer to wanting to be a sound engineer is a strange It's a strange boomerang, but here we are.
So let's talk a little bit about bands because, well, I think that show at United Center, it pretty much was the first time that I had seen the 1975, and I only went because Pale Waves was playing. Pale Waves being like at the time like one of the bands I was listening to constantly, and I'm like, I don't know if I'm going to stay for 1975, but I just wanted to come and like check this out and have a good time. And now this podcast is basically just doing 1975 fan service like out of nowhere. And we're just like, oh wow, fucking love that band now, and it's like we need to.
Yeah, when you came back, you're like, I love the 1975, and I'm like, wow, this is a dramatic turn.
Yeah, I was upset about myself at first. I was just like, I don't know, I music's fine, it's cool. And then listening to Pale Waves, I was like, oh well, yeah, I guess they sound like the 1975, but I'm also like, I like this music much better than the 1975, and now I'm just like, no, fuck it, they're both the greatest bands of all time.
I think that they're both. Just speaking about like the two bands you mentioned, and we're all talking about. I think they're both doing some really cool things now. The thing that was really, I mean, I've been sort of around the 1975 since they were playing tiny clubs. Some of my friends from home were in bands that were touring, and the 1975 were supporting them. This wasn't even that long ago. And so you'd have like two bands from Northern Ireland, and then the local opener was the 1975, which is crazy to think now. And anytime I've ever spoken to any of my friends in those bands, they're just kind of like, yeah, it's pretty crazy what can happen in like whatever, not even 10 years. And their show is an audio visual treat. It's a show. It starts and it ends, and it has an arc, and there's a real element of theater to it, which I really like. And I'm saying that as a sound engineer. My primary sort of focus as an engineer is to make things sound as good as possible, and to work with an artist to sort of deliver what's the term I'm looking for? To deliver it's a product, really. People are paying money to see this and hear this, so it's like everyone needs to be on the same page. Do you want to sound like your record, or do you want to sound like a lounge jazz version of your record? Like, let me know, because we can do either way. Sometimes people just are just like, you just do what you do because we know what you do, and that's fine, and they give you total carte blanche. But sometimes it's like, on this bar we need this, and then 16 bars later we're going to do this, and then it's a very mathematical kind of thing. It's a very, very different kind of experience.
So you're literally changing stuff like in the middle of songs. You're not just, I mean, I'm coming to you from somebody who's mostly only played at like bars and small venues, and occasionally the bar and grill combination.
Oh.
And so they're pretty much like, we'll do a sound check, and then I'll be there throughout the night to like play music in between your sets, or like help you get the microphones out of the way when you're done. But it's like you're set up, you're going, we don't really give a fuck what you're doing. But you're like really like in depth working with them, like in each song, like changing things up that much?
Yeah, I mean, I joked about it earlier on, but I am a firm believer in trying to get the source, whether it's a guitar amp or a drum or whatever, to like sound as good as possible, and to sound kind of like what the artist or the individual band members wanted to sound like. I think one of the trappings that I fell into, even whenever I started out, is that I was mixing bands the way I wanted the band to sound like, which doesn't work. Because everyone's taste is very different. It's like when you get into somebody's car, what level is the volume on their radio? It's the same thing. It's like some people listen to the radio really loud and they're fine and they like that. And then some people, you can barely hear what's going on and they're fine and they can still hear it. It's that perception. And and some people like tons of sub in their car, and some people, have the world's worst sounding radio speaker combination, and that's their reference point. Like that's what they judge the fidelity of music on. So there's a lot that goes into trying to present a band sonically in a venue on a daily basis, and that venue is changing on a daily basis, to an average audience member, like a sample set of that audience member. And the idea is that we try and give everyone as close to having the same show as the same show wherever possible. The bigger the venue, the more difficult that is. The smaller the venue, the more difficult that is, because generally the smaller the venue, you've got less stuff, you've got less speakers pointing at the audience, or the thing might only be like 9 feet tall. So once you get like the fourth, fifth row, you can't hear anything because you've got bodies blocking speakers. But then you scale that up to something like the United Center, where you've got 5 figures of people. You need to be able to, every person in that venue has paid pretty much the same amount of money to see the same show. So you need to be able to deliver coverage, speaker coverage, and also mix in such a way that it's pleasing to the audience and jarring in a good way where required. If you mix a show at the same level, and this kind of goes back to your point about me saying that I'm changing things. If you mix, say a band's show is 90 minutes long, if you mix at the same sound pressure level, dB, for 90 minutes, if you mix it at a flat line, by the end of those 90 minutes, the audience will have zero interaction with what's going on, because their ears have compressed, they've got used to it, so there's no impact. So it's the air conditioning, the air conditioner noise principle. It's like you only really notice the air conditioner's on or off whenever it's on or off, because you get that change, because your brain cancels it out. And it's the same principle with live shows. And technology is a lot better now than it was even 10 years ago. Being able to actually accurately map out venues for speaker coverage, digital consoles that can do loads of automation and macros, time code. There's some shows that are out there that are so complicated, and there's so many moves and cues that need to happen that it starts and it stops. And you've got literally things going on in both the monitor console and the front of house console that humans could not do, because that is the level that the performer on stage or the show itself requires. So yeah, there's a lot that goes into it.
That's the kind of stuff that gets me really excited. I would love to I love it when shows are basically just like all run by a computer. I don't want it to be all run by a computer, obviously, because it's like, oh, it fucked up a little bit, and now the entire show is off, and everybody just go home. But I love the idea that the lighting and the sound and backing tracks and all that is like just run and all that. But I'm again also saying that from a band that plays at bar and grills. So
well, you know what though, it doesn't really matter what size of venue your band plays in now. The reality is like the technology to be able to do your own monitors and that kind of stuff is now so affordable. Mm-hmm. You could go out to Guitar Center and buy like a $1,000 Behringer X something, and some cheap in-ear monitors and some XLR cables, and you've got an in-ear rig. If you've got an iPad, you can there you go. You're going. Stick it in the van and go. And I've seen tours that do that. The kind of caveat with all of that is that yes, you're replacing a person. And I guess I was going to kind of bring this up because this is kind of relevant to like things post COVID. The reality for me is that I lost at least a year's worth of work, like overnight. It was insane. And whenever we can go back to doing shows normally, I really hope that there is a good amount of kind of healthy respect between artists and vendors and crew, because people are going to try and do things leanly budget wise. Like that's a reality here because, and I get it. I'm a business person. I get it. But you're not necessarily paying for the skill set at the time. You're actually paying for the experience of being able to know what to do when everything's go wrong, and how to save the show. So it's a combination of the two. Anyone that has an iPhone can mix monitors on an X32 Behringer for whatever in whatever size band that you work in. That's the easy bit. But what do you do when it goes wrong? If you have no engineering skills and you have no background in that sort of field, you're just going to look. Everyone's going to look at each other and go, "Well, I guess we'll pack up and go home." And you can't do that if you're a band or an artist trying that does this for a living. So anyway, that's a sub rant. We'll gloss over that, but
it's good to think about too. Like I'm wondering like where a lot of industries are going to be looking for how they're going to save money now. We actually did a thing with the Metro in Chicago about Save Our Stages, and I don't know if this is Lizzie, you know more than I do about it, but I don't know if it's a global thing or if it's just a U.S. thing, because it's very like asking politicians about bailouts for venues and for people who work in venues, people who work in music in general.
A lot of it is more national. Yeah, wow, nationwide. I haven't spoken a lot today. Nation, words are hard. But it's nationwide more so here. I know in other countries they do have like Save Our Stages initiative for their local stages as well. But I know at least here in the US, there's still a lot of legislation that's trying to be passed, and people are still trying to get attention for stages. I know that NEVA just posted like, hey, 90% of these venues aren't going to survive because, I mean, here in Chicago, Lollapalooza finally got canceled. Thank God, first of all.
It's the right thing to do, but it does suck.
Yeah, but with that, in regards to work for a lot of event people and people who do work in like audio engineering and stagehand, like my best friend is a stagehand and audio engineer, and she pretty much was like Yuli. She lost everything overnight, and she's still trying to figure out what to do and what's going on even now. And it's we don't take into account those people when it comes to like the Save Our Stages initiative. And I feel like we do need to. I know that there's been some legislation in certain states throughout the US that have finally allowed freelancers and contract workers to apply for unemployment. But again, unemployment's been backed up for months. At least here in Illinois, our unemployment was supposed to run out by the end of May, and I still haven't heard any update about that. With people still getting up to $600 on top of whatever they were originally offered to kind of subsidize the money that they're missing. So for freelancers and contract workers, it's been even more difficult now to stay around even in this field, because I know there's a lot of people who are like, well, I guess I got to go get a normal 9 to 5 if they can find it, or get whatever they get at an essential worker place. That's putting them even more at risk for coronavirus, because it's just nobody's getting paid out and nobody's taking into account that these workers have lost so much. And while there are some funds that go towards helping those individuals, again, contract workers and freelance workers are not going to have those same retributions as people who are employed by a certain music venue. And as we've seen, a lot of these people are freelance or contract workers. I mean, I started linking up trying to do freelance and event work too over the summer, and again, I had a bunch dispersed too, so I get it. But I'm wondering in the UK if you do know if there are any type of initiative similar to it, and is it in any sort beneficial towards people like you who do travel more so?
Yeah, I mean, there are a number of resources for people in various different sort of parts of the industry, whether it's musicians themselves, or producers, engineers. I mean, if you think about how many sort of roles and sub roles, et cetera, that kind of encapsulate the entire music industry, it's the impact is pretty crazy. there are a couple of bodies in the UK that are doing sort of like hardship funds, like help musicians, and I'm thinking Music Cares. The Music Producers Guild is doing some sort of hardship fund. I mean, a lot of it is sort of like, donation based kind of, and then it's got to sort of paid forward. On a on like a political level, there are some help for certain people in different circumstances, depending on whether you like own your own company or you're a contractor or you're like a freelancer. And then there are some people that kind of fit in between all of those, and they just get nothing. So they've literally lost a year's work and they get no help whatsoever. And I have friends that are like, that are higher risk because they have something like asthma, for example. So it's not as easy for them to go like, oh, well, I'm just going to go work in a supermarket and try and earn, some amount of money. The reality is, where I live, all the part-time, short-term, 0-hour contract kind of stuff just disappeared. I applied for about 10 jobs and I heard back from none of them. Wow. Literally. And I get it. They probably just don't have time to send people sorry you weren't successful. But the reality is, that like on my sort of it's not a podcast. It's kind of a podcast. It's not really a podcast. It's just kind of like a chat that I do twice a week on Zoom. But we were talking about this, about like job snobbery. It's like people who would like, oh, I'd never do that. And now it's like, I would do that. And it makes you, this whole thing makes you a lot, very grateful for what you do have. I think that's kind of the summary of this whole thing. Yes, it's not ideal. But it could be a lot worse for me and for my friends and family. And we're all going to get through this together in various ways. With touring, your touring colleagues are your surrogate family and friends for long periods of the year. And just because you're not in a tour bus or sharing hotels or whatever, it doesn't mean that, we aren't keeping in touch with each other as much as possible, because some people don't have a large family to go home to, and if they do, they can't see them because they're maybe slightly elderly. Like, there's a risk factor there. So people are like, well, I don't want to go and see my parents. I'm gonna shelter in place. But I have a friend who, a good friend that I was touring with this year, who lives in Edinburgh, and he hasn't seen basically anyone for like 9 weeks. He's just been getting his groceries delivered, and he's been going out on his bike every day, to get some exercise, but that's kind of it. And all of his like sort of social interaction has been through a webcam, a microphone, and a screen. And as I joked earlier on, this is kind of going to be like the new normal. Like, going out and like hanging out with people is going to be strange, like super strange. I like, and even doing a gig, the idea of doing a gig like freaks me out. It really does freak me out. But yeah.
I know on Twitter there were some people who were saying, like, because in certain states here have way less restrictions than at least here in Illinois and Chicago, which is terrifying to say the least, because the coronavirus cases are still, climbing up. And they were saying that, oh, I'm going to have this gig, who would come? And everyone's like, no, what are you talking about? But I think it's going to be so strange, because as soon as because everyone's saying, oh, by the end of the year, so end of December, all this is going to go away. Not really, but okay. So when it comes to literally, I think it's going to hit January, and I think everyone is just going to go out and just be so overstimulate themselves, because they have been so depraved of having that human interaction. I know even Brian and I were talking, we're like, well, even if, the restriction was lifted enough that like we could go to like our friends' houses and like hang out, like that'd be okay with us for right now. But I think, as soon as we're able to have those larger events again, even if it's in like a 200 capacity ideal, I think people are just going to go and completely lose it. And then I think our coronavirus cases are going to go back up.
I mean, I really hope not. I mean, my whole thing throughout this is that I would much rather this was done right once.
Yeah.
I think I sort of I am echoing a lot of my friends and colleagues with that. The reality is, when you do arena shows, you're in and around thousands of people on a daily basis. I mean, I did an arena show on the 15th of March, which is not that long ago.
You were like
Yeah,
still
that's
finishing up that tour, right? Right around when everything started to shut down.
Yeah, that was that sort of weird period where our bus crashed, and then we went home for a week. And in over that week, the reality of coronavirus really started to like, okay, this is real. Like, brace. And I flew back to London, got all the gear back from Sweden, fixed everything up. We went and did the O2 Arena in London with Halsey. And yeah, like 4 days later, I was flying back to Belfast, and then that was it. Like literally, I haven't I've actually weirdly, like, I put my backpack down, I took my laptop out, and I haven't looked at my backpack since the 16th of March. And I looked at it yesterday because I was like, "Where's my passport?" Like, I haven't needed to look for my passport for months. And was like, oh, freaking out. I was like, "Oh, where's my passport?" And it's like, it's there. It's literally there. And then I was like, I should probably wipe this down with, like, disinfectant wipes, because, I gave it to somebody, and I was like, yeah. So the reality of the whole situation, we were doing that tour. We started in Spain. We then went to, where were we? We're in Madrid. Then we went to Milan, Italy. And we kind of like literally, we traveled through Europe, all the way up to Scandinavia, kind of as things were unfolding. And then we did the UK leg of the tour, and then went home, and then I've literally just been at home talking to my laptop ever since. So
how was it to be like traveling through when it was starting to kind of like come out and like you said, unfold? Because I'm so interested to see, because I know at least over here there's a bunch of people starting to say, I'm not going to that show. I'm just not gonna go, and we're just gonna start to quarantine early. But then I also saw a bunch of people say like, fuck it, it's not real. And then just still go out to shows. Up until it like at least our governor said, absolutely fucking not. We are done with this buffoonery.
yeah, I mean, whenever we did the shows in, where was it? We were in Stockholm. We went up to Finland. And the easiest way to go from Stockholm, Sweden to, where were we? Helsinki, Finland, is to take a boat. And you literally take a ferry through this is where I need my like green screen like map.
Imagine here.
So
and
I lived
a
in Sweden, and I was gonna go to Helsinki while I was living there, and I was gonna take that ferry, and it's like a party ferry. So
yeah, it's the love boat, or whatever they call it.
yeah, it's like people just get on the boat, ride it over to Helsinki, and then ride it back, and they just get drunk on the ferry. So
yeah, so
coronavirus.
Yeah, so basically in the middle of coronavirus, we got it not once but twice, with a show in between. And like me and Yappa, our backline tech for Pill Waves, me and him were like drinking beers in a jacuzzi, like on this boat, and everyone was eating breakfast and dinner en masse, like, in on this boat. And then, like, a week later, we were all at home post accident. We were like, wow. I mean, okay, like, there's a very good chance that we've probably had this. So I quarantined for 2 or 3 weeks, basically, when I got home. And I live with my partner, and she did the same thing. And then, but we've both kind of like still tried to like not leave the house much wherever we need to. And this is my whole thing. It's like, this whole sheltering in place thing. Yes, it's frustrating, but honestly, I just don't want to be in this situation again in like 6 months' time, because it's going to be tough to like get everyone back in and be like, no, really, like, we got to do this again. And I know people are frustrated, but it's definitely for the best. Let's try and do this right and be sensible and think about repercussions. I think that's the thing. Like, I don't really, a lot of people, the kind of people that want to like go out and like be normal are the people that are very short term. They don't think about the long term effects of these things. But again, that's a whole other podcast as well. I feel like I've been saying that a lot.
We're gonna get 3 episodes out of this.
Yeah, it's fine. But you are in like the UK, so you're technically under Boris Johnson's rule.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, no, I agree with that. So I know I just saw something, I think it was yesterday or super early this morning, where he was trying to ease back restrictions on coronavirus, even though he himself got it, which I was super shocked that he like just did not do like a quick 360 around and like,
yeah, quite a few members of our government in Westminster, as in England's government. That's what I'm going to call it, because we actually have our own government in Northern Ireland. Right. It's kind of part of the. There was basically and I'm going to have to say this not in my mother tongue accent because everyone will laugh. There was a power sharing agreement in 97 where basically there would be devolution. So basically there was sort of equal control over policy making and the relationship with the United Kingdom, et cetera, et cetera. So we have our own assembly of ministers and whatever. So our Northern Ireland actually has different coronavirus lockdown laws and whatever than England does. And it's the same as Scotland, and it's the same with Wales. London is the epicenter, obviously, of, excuse me, the cases and the highest death toll. It's such a a densely populated area as well. England are loosening up the lockdown, whereas Scotland and Northern Ireland are like, nope, and nope, we're going to do our own thing. So so we're in a different if we watch something on the TV and Boris Johnson's like, you can go out and you can play football with your grandmother. No, we're not doing that, and neither is Scotland, and I think Wales. I don't know. I can't remember. I don't really. Yeah. So that's confusing in itself. And I've tried. I left Facebook when this whole thing started. I just can't be in this, like, my friends arguing with each other about, this type of coronavirus is worse than this type of coronavirus. And I'm like, just no, delete. Like, see ya. I'm gonna pull the ripcord here. I'm out. So yeah, where you get your news from really becomes like a very important part of my day now. It's like, what is actually credible? Like, what is actually happening in the outside world? So yeah, things are getting slightly more back to normal over here, but the reality is, it's like I was reading something today where, like, there are schools that are reopening, but our school year is pretty much over. Like, it ends like at the end of this month. So people are going to go back to school for like 2 weeks and then be all summer again, and then start again in September. And when they start again in September, it's still going to be socially distanced. So what's the point?
But I also don't trust like children to wear a mask.
No, I mean, I have a really big beard, so it's really difficult to wear a mask because it doesn't actually work. So I end up doing a mask, and then I wear like a buff, it's kind of like a bandana. Yeah. So every time I go and do the groceries, like, I look like I'm going to rob the place or I'm going skiing. Like, it's literally, and it's hot outside, and I'm it's a lot. So I just try not to go outside if I don't have to, if I'm being honest. Like, I'm at that point where I want to get back to work. I want to get back to doing shows and, being part of that thing that the people like pay their hard-earned money to go and have a good time. I want to be part of that and make sure people get what they're paying for. The issue with the way that things are going to go is that the margins on doing socially distanced gigs, reduced capacity gigs, drive through, whatever gigs, but people are going to have to pay as much money as they were for less. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think that it's a novelty in a way that will last for a while, but let's be honest, nobody's going to go to like drive through gigs in November or December. And also I couldn't even imagine, like I was in Chicago, not last summer, but the summer before for Lolla, and I literally nearly melted. I could not imagine doing a drive-through gig anywhere in that heat. Like, you just got a load of cars with their air conditioners, like full blast, everyone just running their engines. Like, that's like a greenhouse gas nightmare.
Yeah.
Like, nobody thinks about that. You know what I mean? It's like, anyway.
That was something that was, they're going to try to do some drive-through movies now in Chicago. Now that all this stuff is canceled, they're like, all right, let's find ways. Let's try to maybe even have like some concerts happening on some stages here, but it's primarily just the musicians, and then they have it like broadcast to a larger audience from there as a way of like kind of with the Save Our Stages thing, trying to bring some attention to it, trying to bring some money to them, and at least like, giving something back to the community, because we are now canceling a bunch of other stuff. And like, I do agree with you, it'll be a novelty at first, but it will also be like, yeah, just logistically having all those cars in one place, or logistically like having a concert with a bunch of bands like over and over again. Like, oh, we have this one artist in Chicago, they played on this stage. Okay, well, that was yours. Now see you in another like 7 months. And the artist is like, cool, well, I got a little bit of money from that. I think people would be willing to pay for like the one concert to be like, hey, support these artists, support these venues, give some money back to the community. But then they're going to be like, well, okay, I did it, so I'm not doing it again. Like, I'm not interested in.
Yeah, I know. It's like the DVD principle. Like, you ever buy a DVD of a band, like their live DVD?
Oh yeah.
Chances are they didn't put that gig on just to shoot that DVD. And it's kind of the equivalent of this. It's like, nobody would do that. Nobody would put that amount of production into a venue, hire a dozen cameras, feed all those people, et cetera, and then shoot it so that they could spit it out on DVD so that you would watch once and then it would live on your shelf for the rest of time. That's kind of what this is going to end up being. People pay a lot of money, artists themselves pay a lot of money to put together a production that is a show. It's a proper show. And the only way that you get to experience it properly is if you go and see it. And also, to make it economically viable, to put that much money and effort into a show, they need to recoup that, and that takes a while. So, if you do the numbers, it doesn't make sense, to produce a quality output show and do it like once. All the DVD sales in the world is not going to pay for that. You know what I mean? Like, especially, we live in a society now where things like media, whether it's music or video or whatever, we're kind of used to essentially paying a minimum for the most amount of stuff. It's kind of crazy to think that the idea, I was talking to somebody recently about burning CDs. Like, I remember buying like CDs in a store and then ripping them onto my little MP3 player or whatever. And I still have all those CDs and I won't ever throw them away, because it's like, I paid like £10 for that CD. I can't remember the last time I bought a record, and that's really bad for somebody like me that works in the industry. I do try to cut out middle people when it comes to like local independent artists that I like. I would rather like drive to their house and post money through their letterbox. Like, I would much rather do that, because I've toured with artists on both sides of that. I've toured with the bands that literally need that t-shirt sale to break even so that they have enough like money to get to that next city. And I've also done tours where they're turning over like 6 figures on merch and night, and that is what actually is making the money on the tour. Like the tour is making money, but t-shirts, like that's where the money is.
Yeah.
And in this situation, what are people going to do? Pre-order merch, like click and collect, like curbside pickup merch at drive-in gigs? Like that's impossible. Like you can barely manage merchandise on a table with people. Like, and that's not a slight to people that work in merchandise. It's difficult, especially if you work on a tour where that is a big part of it. If there's a lot of merch and their turnover is high, like, I did a tour not that long ago that had a like literally like an art, what do you call them, semi of just merch.
Oh yeah.
Like floor to ceiling to the end, and it got topped up periodically through the tour as well.
Yeah.
And that's a big income stream, and you can't really do that on a drive-through basis. And socially distanced as well. If you cut down the capacity, your per head, take on terms of merch sales is going to be so low, it's not going to make sense. It's just not going to be economically viable. So it is that thing where I'm not being pessimistic. I am just trying to be really pragmatic about the scenarios. And I really do feel for small venues. I've done extensive touring of small venues in the US, and I know I'm pretty certain that the next time I go there, a lot of them won't be there after all of this. That's kind of where I'm at. And that really sucks. And those people, the people that work there and the venues themselves are like total, like they're institutions on their own, in terms of like, especially for artists from the UK, it's expensive to tour in the US if you're coming from the UK, or elsewhere in Europe, even just in terms of visas. It's a big old country, so getting around is expensive. So you got to tour hard and do a lot of shows to make it work. So any US touring I've ever done has just been like show, maybe a day off, show, fly to Mexico for one show, fly back to Toronto, show, and I love that. Don't get me wrong, but there's a reason why those tours happen like that, and it's the only way to make them economically viable. And if you have to do the same amount of shows as we were like 2 years ago, but with like a third of the attendance, it just doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
So I'm not like, I'm not raining on anyone's parade, in terms of like them being the sort of inducing positivity out of this kind of very bad situation across the board. But I don't think there is really a lot of sort of the pragmatic sort ofness of it being talked about, especially because it means that, hey, you're going to do a drive-through gig. You don't need a front of house engineer then, because you got no speakers. You're gonna have somebody at the side of the stage with a $1,000 Behringer X32 and an iPad and an FM transmitter they bought off Amazon.
Yeah.
And it's like, because that's all they can afford to do. You know what I mean? It's like, I get it, but when it goes wrong, what are you gonna do? You're gonna have to go around and post refunds through people's windows, like, because they're not gonna move. Like, well, I want my money. I'm not gonna I am staying in my car until I get my money
you
back.
might just be like right here. You're like, all right, now I have to wait.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they're going to block in all the production crew until they get their refund. But I am actually potentially doing one next month. So I'm really curious to see how it goes. It's great. There's a great team working on it, and it will be done properly. But yeah, it's just, this is totally uncharted territory for people like us. But we are generally a group of people that are about solutions. So let's try and come up with a solution to make this viable right now. And then kind of in the background, we can kind of work on trying to get things back to normal for some point next year. So yeah, it's crazy.
I like that. That's a positive way to
look at everything.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I am very concerned about all the venues that are going to be lost here in Chicago, which it feels like we were at a point where it was starting to become more of a thing that they were pushing for donations. Subterranean had a GoFundMe that was up that was doing fairly well, but then that was right before all these protests started happening, where other organizations were asking for donations, and those donations needed to go to something that is going to be a bigger thing for the future of our country, the future of the people of our country.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so of course that money needs to be diverted from some of these funds to the other places, but with so much happening and so much like funds being needed in so many different places, and with so many people out of work without the ability to give those funds, it's like, geez, we're like, it's just everything seems fucked from every end. So
I think this is where people are starting to realize that everything really does run in a cycle. And like Lee said earlier, where people would be like, "Oh, I would never work that job," and now they're like, "Oh, I need to work that job. I'll take whatever you can get." I think this is the wake up call a lot of those types of people needed to kind of bring them back down to earth in a sense. Um, because it's like if you're working a white collar job and then it's like, "Oh, well, you don't have a job anymore. Now you got to go work at a supermarket and be an actual essential worker and deal with like, everything that we put out on Twitter, like, oh, we're dealing with this Karen over here." No, I'm talking in
I had a
general.
white collar job that I no longer have, Lizzie. How dare you?
Listen, I've never had a white collar job in my entire life.
I mean, look,
don't know how it feels.
I'm not like stoked on having a white collar job, but there are a lot of benefits to it.
Right, but you've also never been like, "Oh, I can't believe like people work like that." I'm talking about people who are like,
no.
yeah, no, you're not like that. But it's like what Lee was saying, like people just turn up their nose to those types of jobs and people. It's like, that's kind of the wake up call some people needed because now they're also being like, "Oh, like I'm fucked too for once."
Yeah.
And like it doesn't feel good. It's like, no, it hasn't felt good for a long time. But I did also.
Yeah, sorry, I was just going to say something. You just reminded me though that that wake up call line is kind of perfect because I've only ever had one what I would call normal job, and it was when I was 16, and it was for 2 months. And ever since then, I'm 29 now. I went through university. I worked for my university in as a technical kind of person in their tech services department for a couple of years while I was there on a very peripatetic fashion. It wasn't like a full-time job. I've never had a real job. So if you take my CV and you redact everything that is to do with working in music, I have an address, a date of birth, a passport, and a degree, and that's it. So I'm grossly underqualified for pretty much everything. Is what I kind of went through, and that's a strange thing. Like I was looking at jobs where I was like, okay, that sounds kind of cool. Like it's it's kind of it's either like in IT or programming or whatever, and then it's like you need this, and I'm like, yeah, I don't have that at all. And it's like, oh, it's that whole thing. Like to get experience, you need to do the job. So it's that kind of weird. I don't know what the term is, but it's like it's a feedback loop. No pun intended. You can't get. How am I going to get experience in something like that in the middle of a pandemic? Even if I wanted to, you know what I mean? It's crazy. So, and there are a lot of people that have been doing this for a lot longer than I have. And I am not unique in this scenario. I know people that work in music, in management, facilitation, people who write score, people who are photographers, videographers, people who work in theater. Like, there's so many it's so multifaceted. I know they're all the same. They're like, well, I've been doing this for 15 years and I had a customer service job for like 2 weeks once. And then they're like trying to apply for jobs. And there are people that are technically more qualified getting those jobs because, they don't, it's a very unique scenario where everyone's just kind of like, we're putting the boards up on the theaters and the venues like this is not happening. And and I went through a very strange sort of process of like, well, do I regret making that decision? Maybe I should have went and studied law, because if I was a lawyer, I'd be making a killing right now, probably. You know, or I'd done something else. But that passes. I was like, no, I don't regret my decision.
Right.
That's a very narrow-minded way of looking at this entire scenario. But you know, it's a strange time. Like, you're going to go through a whole range of emotions on various different, you know, things. So but yeah, you're right though. Like, it's strange when you actually peel back everything that you've done for like 10 years and realize that if you take away everything that's very niche, you got nothing.
Yeah,
Which is really weird.
that reminded me. I actually used to be on a debate team in college, uni, and there was a girl who was there, and she was like our lead captain person. And she straight up told me to my face, because I was working like 3 jobs when I was in college, plus like school and everything. And she's dead ass said to me, "Oh, I couldn't work a sales job." She just did like, I think just like something like grocery or like retail. And she's like, "I can't do that. That's too menial of work for me." I was like, "Excuse me?" And I know now, I think she's like HR somewhere, like handling like internships. And I'm like, I don't know if I would trust you handling the youth like that. But that kind of reminded me, because, you know, there's a lot of people, again, like you said, like out there who have experienced this kind of like cycle of like, oh, you need more experience to do this. Well, I have experience in this. Can it be, or as my, where I'm getting my master's degree, they're like, your transferable skills. It's like, why can't you take that? And they're like, no, it's not concretely what we are asking for within the same division. It's similar, but it's not what we fully want. I think it's, in like a bad way, it's nice to see people finally seeing it from the perspectives of like people who are like newly graduated or like still trying to break into an industry, whatever it may be like, now you know what you've been telling us. Oh, you'll just get it. It'll be fine. And you know, it's like, okay, no, now you actually do get it because you're experiencing it now, and it's not fine, and we need to change the way that this system works.
Yeah.
Absolutely, and I think one of the reasons why I set up the ground loop was to try and create some sort of unity and parity between people who have been doing this for a period of their life, whether they're in the kind of in the middle of an arc or they've been doing it for 30, 40 years, and they're kind of like nearing retirement in their brain, or they've just graduated from like a university like I did. And like, I can't even imagine what it would be like if I was like, you know, coming out of my degree and this all happened, you know, yeah, I wouldn't know what to do. So I kind of tried to sympathize and empathize at the same time with a whole range of people within the industry. And that's why I wanted to basically get everyone in a virtual room and all talk about the same thing. So in the sense of, it doesn't matter if you've been doing it for 5 years, 15 years, or 5 minutes, everyone is in the exact same position right now. So this is the time to ask those questions that to other people that because you know, when else would you ever get the chance to either see these people or ask these questions and actually try and learn from each other? So that's been really interesting. And, you know, for me, it's given me like a thing that I do twice a week that's semi-structured. And it's, you know, beyond that, like, you know, I'm so used to either being told by somebody else what's going on a daily basis, or having like an app that just like shouts at me going, oh, you're in this city today and you're in this city tomorrow. Time to eat lunch or dinner. Did you brush your teeth? Honestly, and then you go home, and I go through this period of like 2 weeks of like, well, I live here. I mean, I need to go and get some stuff for the fridge. And now I'm like, oh, I mean, I haven't spent this much time at home in a long time. You know, I put my suitcase away. I haven't done that for like 5 or 6 years. Like, genuinely, like my suitcase stays down because it's like, well, I'm going to need it in like a week, so I'll not put it in the attic. And it's been there since like the 20 something of March.
Damn.
It's got cobwebs on it already, and that's weird. And I know it's weirdly symbolic for me, but it's like I live out of that. I live out of that thing. I live out of my suitcase and I live out of my backpack. I have not used that backpack since I landed. I got in from the airport the day I flew home. and it's still got my boarding pass and all that kind of stuff. It's just really weird symbolism within this, and it's like, wow. But again, it's a unique thing in some ways. This entire pandemic is going to affect everyone in different ways. Either whether it's the industry you work in, and I sympathize with anyone that's been affected by it very much. And I really hope that there is a support network for the people who can't go back to work whenever things get normal, or quote unquote normal, because our normal is not going to be until like this time next year. That's kind of my pragmatic hot take on this whole thing.
I feel like that's a pretty realistic hot take.
Yeah.
I've seen some bands rescheduling their stuff for like early next year, like Foxy Shazam's reunion show, return show is now January 30th, and I'm like, isn't that a little early? Like,
I have something in my calendar for November in the UK. And I have friends that have stuff from January onwards. And all of us are just kind of like keeping in touch with each other, even just like trying to find out what other bands are doing. We're just talking to each other like one-on-one, on a sort of not on a secret hush hush kind of thing, but we're keeping it, confidential, if you will. But yeah, because that's the thing. It's changing. It's not changing quickly at the minute, but for a long time, this was like on a daily basis, things were changing. It's like, okay, we're rescheduling to next week. Okay, it's next month. Okay, no, it's canceled. And this is within like 3 days.
Yeah.
And then for the past couple of months, really now I say months, we haven't really heard that much. And I'm getting notices of cancellations of gigs via Instagram. Like that's how quickly they're happy. It's happening. And by the time I get an email from somebody, it's like, oh, so this is not happening. And I was like, yeah, I saw on Instagram 32 minutes ago. Like it's because that's the reality of
what it is.
That's the reality of how we ingest things now. It's like, oh, somebody's tweeted about something. Oh, somebody's posted a photo about something. And then you get an email, which a pigeon delivered, because of the time difference. So at this point, I'm just trying to stay positive, and it'll happen when it happens. Like, and that's as vague as I can kind of make it, because anything else is speculation, and there's so much sort of like hysteria of people speculating about how gigs are going to happen or whatever. It's like there's no point speculating about things that nobody really has an answer for, until somebody like Live Nation or a massive artist goes, okay, we're back. Unfortunately, somebody or a set of people are going to have to make a big leap to sort of show everyone else that it's like, okay, so if they're doing it, we're back to normal. Like, because that's kind of what happened on the other end. Whenever Live Nation said we're shutting down tours from this day onwards, that was the last day of that tour that I was doing, and that was a Live Nation tour. So it's like if that had been one day later, I would have been going home. That would have been that. So we literally finished the tour. They put everything in the trucks, and then everything shut down. And as soon as they did that, that was like, okay, the rest of the music industry basically followed suit. Yeah, because nobody wants to be responsible for furthering the problem of a pandemic. And that's why it's like, well, if the average person out there that is annoyed because they can't get wood or nails from a hardware store, so they're going to go out and do it and potentially be asymptomatic or whatever. It's like priorities. That's it. That there's a shop near where I live that sold out of hot tubs a week and a half after lockdown, and I live in Northern Ireland. And again, the next time we do one of these, I will green screen this and I will show Ireland on a map. We get like 4 days of summer a year, and we've had them all. Like literally for the past 2 weeks, it's just been raining. Literally lockdown happened, and there was like a hardware store near my house that had a sign that was like, "We don't have any hot tubs." People were buying hot tubs because they're like, well, we can't leave the house now, so let's buy a hot tub. In Northern Ireland, it's like, I don't know, 7 degrees outside right now, and it's June. Like,
I mean, are you gonna need that later after?
Yeah.
Like if everything reopens.
Yeah, yeah,
oh, good
yeah.
thing I have a hot tub.
2021. There's going to be loads of the Facebook Marketplace is going to be flooded with
Hey,
secondhand
you're gonna
hot
be
tubs.
able to get that cheap hot tub
Ooh,
and have 4 great days of parties and
we thought about it, and we were like, well, we've got no room for it. So I'm a massive Simpsons fan, so I was like, oh, what we just need to buy is a pair of jacuzzi suits, which are like these weird like plastic things that you just put bubbled water into, and you just sit there on your couch.
Yeah,
basically the same thing. But yeah, so it priorities. It's like I really hope that people maintain that. It's like, just because we can go out and see more people and do some more things doesn't mean that we're back to normal. We are so far away from being back to normal. And yeah, I can't even imagine what it would be like to then find out on a global level, back inside, everyone, like, recess is over. Can you imagine? Like, really, can you imagine?
no, I can't imagine here, because even now, like, we have open like outdoor seating, and the area that I live in the suburbs of Chicago. It's completely packed of people, and it just looks terrifying. I don't want to go anywhere near it. So I think to try and wrangle in those people, it's not going to happen. And it's going to be the same dialogue of, well, it's not me. I don't care. I'm not, older. I'm not immunocompromised. It's going to be the same. It's going to be just a repeat. When we say history repeats itself because nobody pays attention, is literally happening in front of our eyes on multiple levels. And we are still just
level.
not learning from it in real time. It's truly astounding.
I saw an article, and I'm gonna take the theory of the article, but I'm gonna say it in my own words, which is America goes from 0 to fuck it really quickly. Like, we don't care what you're telling us to do. We've been inside for, 10 days. Like, America's just like, nope, I'm over it. I can't do this. I need to get outside. I need to go do something. So, like, I do feel that there are people in, unfortunately, government who are like, well, we want to give you like some compromise here. And it's like, there's no need to compromise if you're going to say, after being inside for 3 months, you can now go outside, and then everything gets worse, and now everybody's back inside, and like that time frame of how long they're going to want to stay inside until they start rioting on the steps of the Capitol buildings again is like going to be even shorter, and like that speed from 0 to fuck it is just going to go so much faster, because Americans are, if anything, not patient and not realistic. I don't know how it is in the UK, but America is.
Well, it's one of those things where we, culturally, one of the biggest differences, obviously, is population. Like, but you have to remember that per capita, the UK at one point during this whole thing was the worst for deaths and infection rate over the US at one point, because the way our government handled locking down and everything really badly at the beginning. I mean, I am a perfect example. I was flying around, taking boats, sitting in jacuzzis, in early March.
Yeah.
And I will admit, I will put my hand up. I was like, at one point, I was like, nah, this is going to be like, this will be fine. Like, my naivety now, like in retrospect, was, but at one point I was like, nah, this'll pass. It's not gonna impact us as much as it's going to impact anywhere else. And obviously, like, it's terrible. Like that's never been, a thought otherwise. But I was like, nah, this won't affect us. And then like a week later, I was like, well, we were just we were just in Italy, and yeah, it's in Italy. And then it's like, oh, we're up in Scandinavia, and it's like, oh, it's gone into Germany now. And like we flew from Stockholm back to London, London to Belfast. I was home for a week. Belfast, London, Dublin, London, like literally, like I mean, I just fly for a living. I literally fly for a living, most of the time. But even the amount of airports, like Heathrow Airport, was like normal airport, but with some extra hand sanitizer. Like that was all it was, and that was like mid March. And then it was like a week later or whatever, they locked everything down. So there was, our government's been heavily criticized for the way that they handled it at the beginning of all of this.
Same.
Yeah.
And they're still being criticized. They've been criticized, and as far as, in my opinion, rightfully so, throughout the way that they've handled this has been ridiculous. There's no question about the fact that a lockdown was a good idea at the time, and I think anyone that disagreed really needs to like read a book about the realities of a pandemic. But it's systemic. It's like the people that were like, oh, I'm going to do whatever I want. I don't care about no virus. In the UK are the same people, that whenever there was the V-Day, which is like a national holiday, they were out conga-ing in the street. Like this was like a month after lockdown, and people were like in conga lines in their like streets with their neighbors and families and friends. And they're the people that are saying that anyone that is out, protesting at the minute, are the reason why everything's going to shit in the UK. It's like, yeah, but you were out like dancing with your neighbors like a month ago when we had the biggest spike. Like, come on. And it's so frustrating, protesters being fined for contravening social distancing laws, because our government's brought in sort of bylaws that if you couldn't justify why you were in a certain place, or whether you were driving somewhere, or you were breaking the 2-meter thing, or you were in groups of over 6 people, they would fine you. And IKEA reopened in Belfast, and there was like the queue was like a mile long, and everyone was like this far away from each other. And then a week later, there was a properly organized demonstration, socially distanced. Like the organizers in Belfast went around, they measured out 2-meter spaces of distance on the floor, put X's with like gaffer tape so that everyone was 2 meters apart. And during this demonstration and protest, the police were going around with a mask on, just writing people up with fines.
Oh my God.
Jeez.
So like, in a strange twist in this whole thing, like there was like a bailout fund for people that were basically either arrested or fined for protesting in Northern Ireland. At the end of last week, because it stems from vaguity within our government's handling of this whole thing. They've kind of gone, well, we strongly suggest that you don't go outside. And if you do have to go outside, you shouldn't be anything less than 2 meters apart from each other, which is exactly what everyone did. But they were like, yeah, but this is a mass gathering, which is illegal. So we're going to fine you all or arrest you. So it's, and it's like, well, where were you finding people dancing in their streets with their elderly neighbors? Yeah. Like, literally you're killing people. Like, anyway, it's one of those things where anytime I speak to anyone, any of my friends in the US or any of my friends that live in different parts of the UK, we're all going through a very similar thing, but in just different ways. And there is a definite sort of, I just wish, I hope that there is definitely like out of everything, some sort of like humanity top up, like everyone like starts to actually look out for each other more, because if we are going to be in this kind of strange kind of state of semi-normality for any extended period of time beyond this, we're going to have to really look out for each other, because my mental health's taken a plummet from being indoors for 3 months, when I'm used to like traveling, and seeing people every day, and and that constant motion, is really important. So yeah, again, that's kind of why I did my thing. I set up that thing, the ground loop, so that I could keep in touch with people kind of en masse, so that everyone kind of felt like they had something to like go to, like showing up for bus call or showing up for like lobby call at a hotel. It's the same kind of thing. It's like 9 p.m. Wednesday, Saturday, be there. Let's talk about some stuff. And then an hour and a half later, we're done. And it works really, really good. So yeah.
So we're at about an hour and a half into the recording. I don't know if you want to promote the ground loop as like anybody can come and join if they would like to. Like, is it that kind of a Zoom call?
Yeah, absolutely. It's Instagram.com/the ground loop, all one word. And yeah, so basically I've just been like sharing resources for anyone who works in the audio engineering sort of industry, within the music industry and beyond. It's not exclusive, but it's things that are sort of applicable to people who work in the industry that have been really affected directly by everything that's going on. And also, yeah, I do this sort of Zoom hangout on a Wednesday and on a Saturday at 9. It's 9 p.m. my time, so BST. So depending on where you are, it'll change. But
3 p.m. our time.
Yeah, 3 p.m. your time. So it doesn't always work. I've tried to do it in such a way that I can kind of get people in the US, get people on both coasts and in the UK. That's not too late, because people have kids and and all that kind of stuff. And all the people that are used to touring are now like actually able to look after their small children. So they're like, I gotta go feed my baby or whatever. So Instagram.com/the ground loop. And yeah, I've kind of I kind of took my foot off the gas for a week. I was just trying to step back from everything a little bit for the past week, and read up on what's really going on in the outside world right now. And I would obviously encourage anyone to do the same thing, and if they can, to put money in the right places at this current time. We just talked about it. There's one of those things where the diversion of funds between things. But I feel like as fellow human beings, we should really look out for each other, regardless of what it's for. Let's be realistic about what's going on in the world right now, and try and help out in any way that we can. So yeah, if you want to come and hang out and talk about microphones on a Wednesday or Saturday, come join the ground loop. Weirdly, we don't really talk about like shop. We call it shop. Like we don't really. It's more of a. It's just talking about normal things, which is something that people who tour for a living don't really do. We're kind of weirdly insular people. Like we do our things, and whenever we leave the tour or whatever, we go off and we live a normal life, and we don't really speak to each other. So this is weird. It's like we're actually communicating more than we did whenever we were bunkmates on a bus. You know what I mean? So yeah, it's been really, really good.
Nice. Do you think that if people are trying to make their Zoom calls sound better, that they would get some value out of it?
Oh my God.
I don't know. I mean, I think I've only just about sorted out mine. It's only taken 3 months. I would say that the worst offenders for Zoom calls for me have been AirPods. and I had a pair, and I actually really liked them for the convenience, but I would not recommend using AirPods, as in the wireless versions, for Zoom calls. For some reason, they just don't work very good. Yeah, I think that's about it, really. Like, if you want to come and talk about, normal things with engineers, and maybe learn some stuff like that, yeah, that's the kind of place to go. But yeah, if anyone wants any tips on how to make their Zoom calls sound better, we can try. I mean, I still haven't figured out the video thing yet. So maybe for the next one, volume 2 of this,
Yeah.
I'll maybe have a better camera. So yeah.
We'll also have the green screen too, just for added effect. Like,
Yeah,
okay,
green
here's my
screen, the
suit.
map. I'm gonna get on it. Don't worry. I'm gonna get on it.
Awesome. Well, then we'll close up the recording of the podcast there. No one's really chatting at the moment, but maybe they will, and we'll stick
Maybe
around
they'll come
on
back
Twitch
and talk to us.
for a few more minutes. So Lee, just wanted to say thanks again for being on the pod and chatting.
No problem
with us.
at all. My pleasure.
I hope that anybody who's listening who is in a band respects their engineer and the person who's doing the sound for them, because they're probably more important than how just your guitar sounds. And yes, that is a thing that I personally have experienced with guitarists, where I'm like, shut up about your guitar, worry about how the band's. Anyway, that's a personal thing, and I'm going to play our outro song so that I stop talking about my personal stuff. Yeah, so thanks again, Lee, for joining us. And
my pleasure.
From all of us here at the Emo Social Club podcast, I am Brian.
I am Lizzie.
And I'm going to get this timed out just right. And goodbye.